We begin with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, set to give lawmakers a long-awaited interview on Wednesday. He's expected to face tough questions on his reported suggestion to secretly record President Trump. Asking the questions will be the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees, along with two ranking Democrats. Joining me right now, one of those lawmakers, Virginia Congressman Bob Goodlatte. He is chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for being here this morning.
Good morning, Maria.
What's most important on Wednesday for your upcoming talk with Rod Rosenstein, sir?
Well, we have a lot of questions for him, and it's important to note that there is no limitation on the scope of these questions. That's why it will be limited to the people who will be in the room and that it will be in a classified setting. We'll have a court reporter present who has a security clearance, and we'll have a transcript of that interview, and then we will turn that over to the intelligence community to make sure that there are no things that cannot be released to the public. When we have that, we'll make that public. In the meantime, other members of Congress will also be able to see the interview in its classified format, the transcript. We want to know in particular about the new developments that we've been made aware of about Mr. Rosenstein meeting with a group of other DOJ and FBI employees and talking about the possibility of wearing a wire when he meets with the President of the United States, his boss, the chief executive officer of our country, and the possibility of pulling together cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which would be a mechanism to declare the president disabled and therefore have somebody else, the vice president, presumably serving in his place. These are very, very serious allegations. We have all of this based upon a newspaper report, and we have third-party testimony that we've heard in our investigation. We know he's met with President Trump. President Trump has been satisfied and said that he wants him to continue on as his number 2 at the Department of Justice. But the Congress has oversight responsibilities, so we're going to ask him about those questions along with many other things.
Well, there are other things, too, that our viewers are very familiar with. They know that Rod Rosenstein signed off on the final FISA warrant to put a wire and wiretap Carter Page because he was part of the Trump campaign. We know that you and your colleagues have been looking for lots of documents from the Department of Justice, and Rod Rosenstein and his colleagues have been slow walking them. So I want to ask you a little about some of that and whether or not that's going to come up. But first, let me push back on what you just said. You said it's going to be open and you're going to be able to report back to your colleagues. Some of your colleagues right now are complaining about how this was set up, that they're saying Rod Rosenstein basically set up the rules. Jim Jordan is not going to be able to ask questions, neither is Mark Meadows, and they're saying they've been blocked. Your reaction?
No, they're not blocked at all. In fact, Chairman Gowdy and I have made it very clear to the other members of our task force that we will ask any questions that they put forward to us. And this, in fact, was a proposal that Chairman Gowdy and I put forward in order to get a full, transparent discussion in a closed room where you have the opportunity to ask any question that needs to be asked and not have concern about it not being in a classified setting and not be concerned about leaks, which have been a serious problem
did Rod Rosenstein
with our investigation.
Did Rod Rosenstein set up the idea that it could only be you and Gowdy and 2 Democrats in the room? That was his idea, that he only wanted
No. That was our proposal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jim Jordan, of course, is concerned about a number of things. He joined us last week. Here's what he had to say. Listen to this, Congressman. Got to get your reaction.
We need him to answer questions about all kinds of issues associated with the Trump-Russia investigation, but specifically the statement that's alleged that he said, where he talked about actually recording the commander-in-chief of our great country, and he talked about the 25th Amendment. That's specifically what I want to ask him about.
Based on what you know from your interviews this past week, Mr. Chairman, obviously we saw that Nellie Orr took spousal priority, so she didn't have to answer questions. Glenn Simpson took the 5th, but you had another crack at James Baker. Was he serious about wearing the mic?
Well, we don't know because we have not talked to anybody who is in the room yet. We have heard from people who were outside the room, who talked to people who were in the room, and we want to ask Mr. Rosenstein about the information we have garnered from those folks. We also know, as you know, that he's met with the president, and it's very important for us to know that this is something that the Congress has oversight responsibility for, and we will be asking those same questions. We don't know because it wasn't open to the media. It wasn't open to anyone. We don't know what the conversation with the president was. The Congress has an oversight responsibility, so we will be asking all of those questions and more related to our investigation.
Understood, Mr. Chairman. Your colleague, John Ratcliffe, Congressman Ratcliffe, joined us last week, and after he did the interview with James Baker, the two interviews this past week, he tweeted out this: "After my interview with former top FBI attorney James Baker, I'm more convinced than ever before that the FBI and the DOJ, number one, has not met their obligation to disclose material facts to the FISA court. Number two, leaked classified information to the media. Number three, violated their own rules with respect to dealing with terminated sources like Christopher Steele. And number four, and most importantly, they had a bunch of Trump-hating agents and lawyers that were telling President Trump he wasn't under investigation when, in fact, he was." Your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot of evidence to support Mr. Ratcliffe's statements, and we want to ask Mr. Rosenstein about that. He came into this matter at the later end, but he was involved with the approval of the third renewal of the FISA warrant application, which is basically requesting a court in secret to approve a wiretap on an individual who's a United States citizen, and this went on for a full year, the last 3 months of which Mr. Rosenstein was involved in the approval of that. So we have questions for him about that, and we will be sure to ask plenty of questions regarding it.
What John Ratcliffe is saying is that they held back information to the FISA court. They had information, but they did not present it. They had information that refuted any collusion, but they didn't give it to the FISA court. Is that what you saw?
I think there is a lot to suggest that what Mr. Ratcliffe is suggesting is a very serious concern, and that's why we want the Deputy Attorney General to respond to that and give his perspective on it.
Welcome back, and I am back with House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte. And Mr. Chairman, we were talking about your busy week that you had with your colleagues, given all of these testimonies, but Glenn Simpson took the fifth. Nellie Orr said she's hiding behind spousal privileges. You've got all of these mechanisms to avoid telling the truth. What are you going to do about it?
Well, nonetheless, we have first of all, we have an awful lot of witnesses that we are able to talk to, as well as people in the Department of Justice and the FBI who have provided us information as whistleblowers, if you will. So we're putting together a lot of useful information. But the fact that Mr. Simpson took the fifth, which is a representation that his testimony may tend to incriminate him,
right.
And therefore he refuses to testify, which he has a constitutional right to do, and you can't conclude from that he has indeed committed a crime. It nonetheless begs the question why that is not being investigated and why we need a special counsel. So this is just one more thing that would point toward the need for the appointment of a special counsel to look into all of these matters. In addition, after the election, we're gonna proceed with an interim report of our findings, and that will be true whether Republicans or Democrats are in the majority in the House. I think the Republicans will, and if so, the new chairman can continue that work in January. However, you also have a Senate Judiciary Committee perfectly capable of conducting these investigations. You have an Inspector General who is looking into the FISA warrant abuse allegations. So this matter is not going away based upon the outcome of this election.
Well, this is a good point, because obviously I asked you a moment ago, what's your plan B? You're going to be in the room on Wednesday with Elijah Cummings and Jerry Nadler, your colleagues on Judiciary Committee who are Democrats. They've got a completely different agenda than you do. So if the House flips in 2.5 weeks' time, are we going to see one of those gentlemen as the chairman of this committee?
We don't know what their intentions might be. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But until January 3 at 12 noon, I'll be chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Trey Gowdy will be chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and we will continue this investigation.
And so you think that your interim report that you're going to come out with after the midterms will be enough to educate the public in terms of what happened here? Is the president going to declassify the documents that you've been asking for in terms of declassifying so that the American people know what went on here?
We've certainly urged the president to do that. And it's my expectation that he will do that at some point in time, but I can't speak for the president.
All right. So next week, in terms of the priorities for you, it's the wearing of the wire, it's the 25th Amendment, and what else, sir?
Well, it's the fact that we've had a number of meetings, which is what Mr. Rosenstein suggested for this meeting. We'll just meet and talk about all these things. We said, no, you've got to be under oath, and it's got to be a transcribed interview that will preserve the questions and the answers given. And we've had public hearings where Mr. Rosenstein has refused to answer questions, for example, with regard to the FISA warrant application. So this will be an important opportunity in the appropriate setting to ask all of those questions regarding the conduct of an investigation that began long before he became involved. But he certainly was at the crux of it at the moment that James Comey was fired and this discussion took place about whether or not a wire would be worn. We want to know about that and his other involvement in the investigation up to that point. Not to interfere with the special counsel's investigation, but to get the facts.
We'll be watching, sir. Thanks very much. Bob Goodlatte joining us there.